Please be seated. So this past week, the Perseid meteor shower peaked. In fact, it's still visible up until about August 25th. You can see it when the sky is not cloudy or the moon's light doesn't obscure the view. So once every 133 years, the comet that produces this meteor shower is visible to the Earth. It's called the Swift-Tuttle comet, and it's because two guys, one named Swift, one named Tuttle, observed it in the sky in the 19th century simultaneously, but didn't know. So they called it the Swift-Tuttle. Didn't know either one of them did it. The last time it passed close to the Earth was in the early 1990s. And the next time will be around 2130. In fact, in the news a few years ago, there was this fear that maybe it would strike the Earth in the 2030s. But rest assured, it's not going to do that. They figured out that it wasn't, they calculated, and it was not really it's going to miss us still. So this comet that's producing this meteor shower is orbiting the sun, and its ellipse, as it comes close to the Earth, like I said, around the sun, and then goes all the way out to Pluto and beyond. And it takes it about 133 years, as I said, to make a complete circuit. And it comes, the stardust in it, the fire in it, the gases in it come from the beginnings of the universe. What we see every August is not necessarily the comet itself, of course, because that only comes once every 133 years. But we see the dust and debris of hot gases and that trail behind the comet as it moves. Now, how the comet came to take up this orbit is a little bit mysterious, lost sort of in the midst of the origins of the universe, but it has to do with, we do know it has to do with the gravitational objects, other gravitational objects, their pull, and the momentum from the Big Bang. So what we see is really debris from the Big Bang. Now, meteor showers are beautiful, and I love them, and I love the stars, of course, and I have taken you there in your imagination out to one of these comets this morning for a reason. And that reason is because the gospel passage is kind of tough, and it hits close to home for many. Division is part of our lives, it seems. The other day, I was simply walking past a group, and they were discussing some politically charged topic, and I found myself disagreeing with them, and then immediately becoming angry, and coming up with all sorts of arguments. And even though I had very little idea of what they were talking about, even though I didn't know them, and I had only heard maybe a snippet of the conversation. So I immediately became emotional about it, and I think a lot of us are feeling kind of triggered like that these days. But also there crept in a little bit of sadness, and the sadness was, maybe I would never be able to even get in a conversation with them, even if we disagreed. So when I bring to mind the vastness of the universe as it stretches out in space and in time, I get a sense not of our divisions, but of our connection to each other. The universe is immense, far larger than our minds can grasp. And we live but a brief time on this planet. We ought not to squander it. We ought not to squander this opportunity to connect with our lives, with the very events of our lives, and with the lives of each other. It's too easy to indulge our anger and our feelings of grievance and our feelings of righteousness. And we can do so, and we do so, I do so, at our peril. For in the end, division isolates. We might feel for a while safe, protected, righteous within our little bubble, among those who agree with us. But the more we get comfortable and more we get comfort from those close to us, the more tempted we are to look out from our little bubble and say, those guys are crazy. And we demonize them, and we dehumanize them, and we withdraw from those that we oppose. So, but besides being a little painful, our gospel passage is also confusing. It's in Luke's gospel, and you all know, after all, what happens in the beginning of Luke's gospel. What do the angels announce to the shepherds in the fields on the day of Jesus' birth? That's a question for you all.
Fear not.
Yes, there is a fear not in there, but what I'm thinking about is the phrase peace on earth. And in the King James translation it goes, peace on earth and goodwill toward mankind. So, yet today, Jesus says, not peace, but fire I bring. Sounds like a contradiction, but before we say Luke is contradicting himself, let's also remember from that Christmas story, when Jesus is brought by his parents to the temple, and there's Anna there, and there's Simeon, who says, now your servant can go in peace. But after he says that, he says, now your servant can go in peace, I can go in peace. But this child is destined to be a sign that is rejected. Many will fall and many will rise because of this child. But ultimately, this child will be rejected. So, Jesus and his followers are indeed bringing peace, but their message, paradoxically, will also bring division and strife. So how many people here are familiar with the phrase Pax Romana? So in the early service, I asked that, and only one person knew or had heard of the phrase Pax Romana. So I want to see if you all will get it. So Marge, I know Marge knows it, and Tom knows it, and June knows it. So total, I think I'm counting about 4 people. Well, that's good. That's 4-1. We won today. So anyway, the Pax Romana that term was originally, the first time that it was seen in writing was by Seneca in about the year 55 AD. And it's about a kind of absence of civil war within the empire from the time of Caesar Augustus, when Jesus was born, up through about 5 other emperors. But here's the thing that's kind of crazy about it. Even after Seneca inked those words, there were people saying, this is just propaganda. And the reason they say that is because just because there weren't great civil wars, there were all these revolts that would occur, and the Roman legions would come in and they would suppress these revolts brutally. And they would parade them in front of people, and they would humiliate the people who were rebellious, and sometimes they would crucify them. So maybe, and by the way, many of these kind of revolts and this kind of thing happened in Palestine and in Judea around the time Luke was writing and around the time his Christian community was being formed. So one has to wonder, is Jesus deliberately contradicting this Pax Romana, this peace, as a kind of false peace? Is he trying to undermine false claims to peace? Because how peaceful was a Pax Romana that had beneath it injustice and violence? So, let's move on a little bit in our passage. It continues and it says, not only fire, but he says, I came not to bring peace, but division. And then he recites a verse from Micah chapter 7, in which he says, in a household of 5, 3 will go against 2 and 2 against 3. And like I said, this echoes this passage from Micah, in which he refers to the son against the father and the daughter against the mother, and the daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law. And that is interesting too, the whole idea. Remember, daughter-in-laws went to live with the son's family. So this is divisions within a household. But so why might Jesus be quoting this? In Micah, what Micah is actually condemning is corruption in the markets of Jerusalem, among the merchants of Jerusalem. There's a lot of fraud being committed against the poor. There's a lot of high interest rate loans. And the rulers are turning a blind eye. And in some cases, they're benefiting from this and from taxes. And so Micah is saying, if you keep on like this, every household will be divided against itself. Every household will have a civil war within it. That is the fruit of corruption and injustice. And Jesus takes up these same words as he addresses the crowd. So what is he saying? So I think he's saying this. Now, I'm going to use one of my favorite theologians, and when I was at the 8:30 service, nobody knew who I was talking about, and they actually kind of chuckled when I said the name. So we'll see, maybe somebody does. But my favorite theologian, his name is Bernard Lonergan. And in his writings, he discusses what he calls a social surd. Now, surd is a mathematical term. It turns out that Lonergan was a mathematician before he became a theologian. And a surd is basically something that a number that cannot be understood in any other way except that it is just this number. And so what Lonergan was using this for was he called it a social surd. And he meant that due to sin and injustice and bias, societies can devolve into conflicts that defy understanding. Sides seem to dig in and can't even seem to talk to one another, as if their speech is almost unintelligible to each other. And I think that's kind of interesting because this is the exact opposite of what happens at Pentecost, right? Remember Pentecost with everybody talking different languages, and yet what? They all understood each other. I think our passage today from Luke is maybe trying to get at something similar, that our social world can sometimes, in its history, devolve at certain moments to a situation in which sides look at each other and say, those guys have lost their minds. Now, Lonergan would add, and I think this is important, that the social surd does not last forever. The situation of absolute unintelligibility does not last forever. That while Jesus in his wake may bring fire and division, that is not the end of the story. That he also came to redeem the world, to bring it to another and different place, a better place, a deeper peace, a truer unity. But sometimes we live in that historical moment, in that time of division. And that, I want to say, is where we live now. At least that's how I read the signs of the times. So I want to tell you this story. It's about a friend of mine, a patient really, who is she works as a kind of healthcare provider. She's actually a physical therapy assistant. And she probably makes somewhere in the range of $30,000 to $40,000. And she lost her first home, or one of her apartment that she was renting, because the landlord at the time wanted to renovate the house and she had to go find somewhere else. So she did find something else, but it turns out she had to move to Kentucky, which was about an hour or so, or maybe more, away from her work. She moved to Kentucky with her boyfriend because it was a lot cheaper there, and she could afford to live there. But needless to say, with that kind of commute, she became exhausted. So she searched for another home around this, Jefferson City, Morristown. That's where she's from. That's where her home is, really. It's where she grew up. And so this is this is Jefferson City or Morristown area. So you kind of guess how much the rent is now that she's paying. $1,200. So, it's $2,000 a month. I mean, really, it was maybe $1,900, but it was close to $2,000 a month. So she's paying $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year, more or less, on a $30,000 to $40,000 salary. She's managing, but for how long? This, I think, is what Lonergan meant by a social surd. It's not intelligible. Is there maybe greed in there somewhere? Some landlord is making some cash? I'm sure that has something to do with it. And Lonergan would say the same thing. It is part of a sin and bias of individuals. But I'm saying a little bit more than that. Here is a woman that is only making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, and she can't afford a decent apartment. Is that right? None of us would say that's right. That doesn't seem just at all. But because the solution seems so difficult and so beyond us all, politicians can use that to stoke divisions and say, On one side, it's the Democrats' fault. Or on the other side, it's the Republicans' fault. And they gain, and my friend, she still can't afford her apartment. So this is where we live. So what do? So personally, the way I try to approach this, I'm trying to be on the side, not of division, but of redemption. That I'm trying to sort of be with others, a kind of force that might bend that arc of the social surge back upwards toward redemption. Not downwards, not continue it downwards toward chaos. Now that doesn't mean I don't take sides on issues, nor does it mean that I don't advocate at times. But it does mean, and it doesn't mean that I don't have an opinion about, say, like affordable housing or how to treat the homeless or about vaccines, for instance. But at times, I have to take a larger perspective. I got to ride on the comet's tail for a little bit and take a breath. Think about the vastness of the universe and its time and space. And think about how we are all connected. Teilhard de Chardin said it great. He talked about fire. He talked in his Mass on the World about calling down the fire on the earth, but his fire was a little different. He saw it as a spark of the divine in all of matter, infusing all of matter, so that matter itself had a bit of the divine in it, and urged matter back toward the divine. And this fire, he thought, was the fire that was lit at the very beginnings of creation, at the beginnings of the Big Bang, the same fire that we saw in the comet and the meteor shower. It's a fire that rebirths creation and the human race. And each of us has this fire. So, don't let it go out. It can sometimes seem like we live in the darkest of times. It can sometimes seem like absurdity is the victor. Death is the victor. Division is the victor. But it is not. So be aware today. Look around. Take it in. Take in each other. Take in your life. Be intelligent. Don't just scroll from one thing to the next. Research some stuff a little bit. Not just on some popular podcasts or on some stream on YouTube, but maybe look at differing opinions. Read some books, maybe. Be rational. That means listen to your opponent's arguments and try to give arguments of your own. Resist flying off the emotional handle, as I kind of did with those people I was overhearing. But most of all, be responsible. Do something to bring us together instead of falling farther apart. Division usually has losers and winners. And the losers are almost always the poor and the suffering. And it's to them that we owe our attention. Amen.